Good afternoon from Thailand, distinguished guests, colleagues, and friends. It is a truly pleasure to see you all joining today in this special webinar, Unlocking the Power of Virtual Power Plants in Thailand, the New Role of Regulators. Today, we join by participants from across Thailand and from around the world, regulators, experts, and partners who share the same goal of creating a cleaner, smarter, and more flexible power systems. It is wonderful to see such a strong international community coming together virtually to exchange ideas and experiences. First, I would like to extend my heartfelt thanks to Regulatory Energy Transition Accelerator, or RETA, and the Regulatory Assistance Project, AP, for making this event possible and for your continued collaboration with the Energy Regulatory Commission of Thailand in advancing our shared mission of energy transition. As many of you know, energy regulators today face the challenge of delivering affordable, reliable, and clean electricity in a rapidly changing power sector. Thailand is no exception. We are now moving forward with renewable energy expansion. The growing integration of renewable energy, the rise of distributed generation, and the need for greater system flexibility require us to rethink how to open our system in a planned, operated, and regulated. This is where the virtual power plants, or VPPs, play a very exciting role by aggregating many small resources like rooftop solar, energy storage, and demand response, and coordinating them as one smart system. VPP can provide flexibility and stability to the grid at a lower cost. For Thailand, this innovation could open new doors for both energy security and consumer empowerment. Today's session gives us a great opportunity to learn from global experiences, such as Hawaii's utility-led model and Australia's market-led approach, and to discuss how Thailand can apply these insights within our own context. I'm so glad to see many colleagues from the ERCs and other agencies joining this knowledge sharing event. It is through this kind of collaboration, learning, and open dialogue that we can move faster and further together. Because by saying this, the energy transition is not just about technology or policy. It is about the people, trust, and partnership. Every discussion like this brings us one step closer to a more cleaner, more resilient energy future for Thailand and the world. So thank you again for Rita, Rap, and everyone joining from near and far. Let's continue to learn, share, and grow together. Because the power of change truly begins with all of us. Thank you very much.
So thank you, Dr. Poonpat. Then follow from my part. Just want to give a brief history of the cooperation between the RETA, RAB, and Chulalongkorn University to doing this report. Actually, Thailand has started the demand response a couple of years ago, as well as we do have a smart grid master plan. But for the virtual power plants, it's still new for us. And in the report, you will experience that in other part of the country, the VPP is also new. In some jurisdiction, for example, Australia and Hawaii. And I hope that today we will have a productive webinar. Thank you.
Thank you both for that warm welcome. In this first section, we're going to explore what virtual power plants are and how the different main business models work. I'm really delighted to turn over the reins to my colleague, Sean Enterline. He's a senior associate here at RAP and a co-author of the paper. Sean, over to you.
Thank you very much, Becky. Good morning to our colleagues in Thailand and in the Asia Pacific region. Excuse me, did I say good morning? I meant good afternoon. And good morning to my colleagues in North and South America, and good day to everybody who's taken the time to join us. It's good to have you here. As Becky said, my name is Sean. I am an energy economist. I have a background in load forecasting and resource planning, and it's been my good fortune to work with our team here at RAP and with Retta and work with our external reviewers to come to you today with some observations about virtual power plants broadly. These first three sections are aimed at a very wide audience to kind of get ourselves on a common foundation of understanding with the concept and their application as it sits today around the world. And then in the fourth section, we'll offer some considerations for Thailand-specific regulatory structure and market structure. So section one, I think is maybe 6 or 7 slides here. We're going to cover a few basic concepts, 3 primary benefits, and just highlight just a small number of examples among a very, very wide array. When you look internationally, there are hundreds and hundreds of examples of virtual power plant programs, and we're selecting just a few to highlight some of the principles, concepts, and benefits today. So first of all, the title of our report emphasizes grid flexibility. And so I wanted to offer a definition from a recent publication. This is from an author named Tyler Norris and his colleagues at Duke University. They published a great report on grid flexibility, and they defined it very simply as the ability of end-use customers to temporarily reduce their electric consumption from the grid. This is happening primarily at times of system stress, and it can happen using any number of different devices, whether it be on-site generation, shifting workload on the demand side, or operations, as has traditionally been the case for demand response in the commercial and industrial sectors. So this definition isn't super fixed, and so I want to signal to you that this is the current state of the conversation in our industry. But approach the definition of flexibility with flexibility, if you will. The graphic on this title, or on this slide rather, is not new. This is from Lawrence Berkeley Labs. I think it's going perhaps on its 10th birthday in the coming years. And it's meant to help us conceptualize demand response over different time scales. And on the left-hand side of the time scales, you see years and seasons. This is the domain of shaping the load. Not squarely a demand response function traditionally, but perhaps the more squarely influenced by investments in energy efficiency and in the building stock itself and all of the end uses within it. But as you move into those middle time scales, the yellow triangle, the light blue triangle, this is the time scales between days and hours. This is where demand response in recent decades has found its home. You shift load out of these peak hours of grid stress at the top of the load duration curve for grid systems, or shed it, as the case may be, entirely for some time. But what's exciting about the present moment is we're in an environment where technology is allowing us to provide grid services on much, much smaller time scales. Services that were provided traditionally by power plants and supply side resources can now be provided by small scale, kilowatt scale demand resources. And we call that shimmy, just to be informal about it. But we're talking primarily about voltage and frequency regulation here on the seconds and minutes timescales. And as you'll see later on, there's examples of residential VPP programs that are providing that kind of service using batteries primarily, but other resources as well. So what is a virtual power plant itself? Two components here, and thank you to the Smart Electric Power Alliance for these graphics. These are just excellent. VPPs are aggregations of behind-the-meter distributed resources. And this definition can be very wide. Distributed resources can capture anything almost anywhere on the grid, but the emphasis is on the distribution rather than the transmission system, and on small-scale behind-the-meter resources rather than interconnections at other points in the grid. And these 5 icons are representing the distributed resources that are closest to commercial maturity. And the central one there in the middle is the best example. Smart thermostats and their ability to remotely control heating and cooling systems is really the central, probably most commercially mature example of distributed resources. But all of these other ones are right on its heels. Behind-the-meter batteries are very capable distributed resources, particularly when they're paired with solar. Electric vehicles, as you know, can not only be controlled unidirectionally so that we can control when they're charging, but the long-term vision that's been held out for many years now is vehicle to grid. And you don't have to go all the way to two-way vehicle to grid capabilities to make fantastic progress on virtual power plants, but it is part of the vision. And then lastly, water heaters. I don't think you see as many of these as a distributed resource these days as we actually have in past decades, but it's a very capable technology, thinking of the electric resistant storage water heater in particular. So those are the consumer devices that define the commercially mature distributed resources. They are not enough. You've got to have an enabling software platform to control them and to network them. And this is where the Smart Electric Power Alliance just had a fantastic publication called Decoding DERMS. That's just a whole paper dedicated to distributed energy resource management systems and how they're being used within the utility back office to control these distributed resources. So we introduced that Lawrence Berkeley Labs graphic with the triangles and the timescales because that's the history of demand response kind of writ large. And I wanted to offer some similarities and some differences between virtual power plants as they're developing today and demand response as we've understood it in past decades. So first, the similarities are really fourfold. Their location, grid services, technology, and then kind of an other catch-all category. Both virtual power plants and DR assets are typically behind the retail meter. So think buildings primarily. In terms of grid services, they can provide energy services increasingly, but the bulk of what they provided is a capacity-based service, a peak shaving, top of the load duration curve reduction. And then lastly, the catch-all that I like to use for all the other services is ancillary services. And this is the very small timescales, minutes and seconds, where you can get load shedding, load shifting, voltage and frequency regulation as well. The technologies historically have been primarily demand side, but they're increasingly including supply side devices and storage in particular, which looks a little bit like both. And then lastly, I just want to acknowledge the definition of flexibility, as I indicated, and certainly the definition of virtual power plants is changing with technology, changing with innovation and program design. And so there really is no single definition. And where I think we're going to continue to see a considerable degree of overlap as we try and define what it is we're developing here. In terms of differences, there's 3 primary ones, at least historically. The customer class is the first. Virtual power plants are primarily a set of aggregated devices coming out of the residential class, whereas demand response historically has come out of the commercial and industrial classes. And what goes with that difference is size. VPPs are primarily less than 10 kilowatts in size. So if you think level 2 electric vehicle charging, that is typically less than a 10 kilowatt load. Same thing with water heating, certainly with most smart thermostat and heating, ventilating, and air conditioning systems. So you need aggregation, in other words. Contrast that size with traditional demand response. At least here in North America, the threshold has often been 100 kilowatts or more. And there are many examples of commercial industrial loads that are that big. So the last distinction here, or difference, is aggregation. You have to do it to get up to grid scale services with residential scale devices, but you don't always have to do it with commercial industrial scale or demand response processes. So there's three reasons why we want to do virtual power plants, and I've got a graphic to kind of illustrate that in each of these next three slides. The first is to increase system utilization. We want to get the most or more out of the grid we've already invested in. And this is just an example of a load duration curve where you've got all 8,760 hours in the year ranked from top to bottom. And most systems in most countries have a rather steep left-hand side of this curve, the peaking part of the curve. And we want to reduce that. Flatter load duration curves are more economically efficient. They're easier to serve from a dispatch and operations perspective. And I want to point out something that Thailand has going for it, just to preview. They've got a wonderfully flat load duration curve, in my experience, a very high system utilization. And that's a great place to begin investment here, particularly when you think about what's changing. As solar penetrates any electric grid, as electric vehicle charging penetrates any electric grid, this curve is going to change. And we're still going to be challenged to keep it as flat and as low cost to serve as possible. So this is where virtual power plants can come in, not only to increase system utilization, but perhaps in the case of Thailand, to maintain an already high utilization rate. The second rationale for VPPs is to lower costs. This is not a new graphic, but it's an excellent 2023 graphic from the Brattle Group, where they studied just one grid service, resource adequacy in this case. Some people might call that generation capacity. And they compared gas plants to grid scale batteries to virtual power plants. And each of these three verticals simply shows the costs, pretty well known in most cases, to the benefits, which for gas and batteries is primarily about energy and some ancillary services that can be provided. And you see a net cost there between gas and batteries. And as we all know, batteries are very competitive now. They can be more cost effective than gas. But what's so interesting about the present moment is if you do a really rigorous job at cost benefit analysis, virtual power plants can be competitive too. And they can net down to a very low cost, as the graphic is indicating. And I want to be transparent about what's driving that. The arrows linking the orange box for distribution avoided costs and the pink box for emissions avoided costs are comparatively large for virtual power plants. That's because of where they're located and because they tend to be either demand side or renewable by their nature. So the cost benefit analysis you do in your jurisdiction really influences the competitive landscape for virtual power plants compared to batteries and to gas. So we'll return to this theme of distribution avoided costs later on. I just wanted to highlight it here as being among the bigger benefits of a VPP. So lastly, VPPs can be very fast to deploy. We've got three examples here from North America, and my favorite, which we highlight in the report, is coming from Ontario, Canada. Back in 2023, they partnered, the Ontario System Operator specifically, partnered with a VPP provider and software platform called Energy Hub. And within 6 months, they went out and they enrolled about 100,000 homes, and they got about 90 megawatts in peak summer capacity. That's fast. You can't develop even batteries that fast. And certainly power plants, at least in today's development environment, take years, not months. So that's a really wonderful story. And since 2023, when that program began, it's continued to grow really quickly. It's now up to, I think, 250,000 enrollments and somewhere in the neighborhood of 200 megawatts of summer capacity. So that isn't just a a one-time phenomenon. It's continuing to grow very fast. And importantly, it's growing fast in a climate that is a cold one. And it's still getting a summer cooling load to come down. So if we go to the Western United States and Arizona, particularly, that's a very different climate. That's a desert. It's very hot. And they're having much the same experience. They're seeing year-on-year growth in their cool rewards program. It's basically the same thing, controlling smart thermostats to reduce cooling loads in the building stock there in Arizona. So two very different jurisdictions, two very different climates. And then, of course, California, often a leader on many fronts in our industry. They've got their demand-side grid support program, which has enrolled 750 megawatts of customer-sited storage already, and it continues to grow here in 2025 at very fast rates. So as you can see, these numbers are still in the tens and hundreds of megawatts. They're not yet gigawatt scale in any particular jurisdiction that I'm aware of, but they're right on that cusp. They're growing. So this last slide is just to point you back to the report. We included this table in the report with hyperlinks. So you can click into any one of these examples of a VPP program and see some of the details. The left-hand column here is just the list of 5 commercially mature DERs that are commonly making up virtual power plants today, with a 6th category that catches instances where the software platform is able to handle multiple DERs of different types within its architecture. I've already talked through the smart thermostat examples here with Energy Hub in Ontario and with Cool Rewards in Arizona, but there's many others, and encourage you to look into them. So the last slide in this section is a high-level set of objectives for successful VPP programs. And this is coming from my colleague, Doug Middleton at Tesla. We had the good fortune to interview him as part of the preparation and research for this report. And of course, you know, Tesla's everywhere. All the continents, all the jurisdictions, developing battery projects at all scales, grid scale and residential behind the meter with their Powerwall battery. And so Doug was conveying first, he needs to see simplicity as an original equipment manufacturer for him to get excited about moving into a jurisdiction. And that has several dimensions. It's simplicity in customer enrollment. It's simplicity in the pricing structure. It's simplicity in the performance structure. And I'll pause on that because I'm a program design professional. It's some of what I do. And I like performance-based designs. It feels fair to me. And what Doug was conveying that, hey, that's good in concept, Sean, but in practice, that can get overly complicated for the customer. And you have to balance the performance-based mechanism with simple customer messaging. And then the last thing on simplicity I'll mention is simplicity for the contractor, if you will, the provider of grid services, the aggregator themselves. They need to have at least a degree of administrative simplicity to invest their capital and take the risk as business owners to aggregate and to provide grid services through these programs. The second bubble is profitability. And of course, a for-profit company wants profitability, but he was offering this as a good faith observation, is that if we as regulatory professionals are too conservative and unwilling to give a strong price signal, it's going to slow down adoption. So there's this direct relationship between the profitability of the service and the program that we design and how fast it will get adopted. And he really encouraged us to find that balance and acknowledge that if we're not giving enough of an economic incentive, we can't expect a great deal of participation. Well, my favorite bubble here was consistency. Doug was conveying the experience of the Connected Solutions program here specifically. That's a program out of the state of Massachusetts in the United States. And it had what I would characterize as a moderately successful 3-year launch period. Its design, its incentives, its enrollment, its performance was good. But what happened with this program is that it was reauthorized in substantially its same form for a second 3-year period. by the Massachusetts regulator. And it was that signal of consistency, the reauthorization on the part of a regulator for another 3-year period under substantially similar terms and conditions that actually boosted adoption, in Doug's view, of that program. And it's having it's a faster pace of adoption here in the beginnings of its second 3-year period than it had in the first. And so there's a steady hand here and a message of consistency that I wanted to bring through from Tesla's perspective. So that concludes section 1. I'm going to take a drink as my voice gets a little croaky. Forgive me, please. And I want to introduce my colleague, Lakin Garth. He's the Director of Research and Industry Strategy at the Smart Electric Power Alliance. And he leads his organization's research and efforts to accelerate our industry's transformation to cleaner and cleaner energy systems and sources. So with that, he's going to cover business models, and I will come back for the second half of this section to talk about the regulatory topics that flow out of them. So with that, Lakin, would you please take the floor? I'll click through the slides for you.
Sure thing. Thank you, Sean. Again, my name is Lakin Garth, and as Sean mentioned, I'm a researcher at the Smart Electric Power Alliance, and I'm also the primary author of the report he previously referenced, Decoding DERMS, Options for the Future of DER Management. So if we can go to the next slide. Before I describe the primary business models, I want to take just a moment to describe the value that VPPs provide to utilities and system operators. So this slide just shows on the vertical axis, the grid value, and then on the horizontal axis, what we see is the state of play today and the potential future use cases for DERs. To date, the primary value delivered to utilities and system operators in the US is through bulk system peak demand reduction. In the United States, utilities and system operators have consistently, reliably, and affordably used virtual power plants for event-based peak demand reduction. However, if we really think about all the value that DERs can provide, researchers in the US estimate that about 1/3 of the value of DERs could result from distribution system deferrals. Here in the US, we're starting to see some of the leading utilities begin to dispatch VPPs to help address these distribution level constraints and help defer costly distribution system upgrades. On the next slide, I'll start to describe several different participation models for effectively managing DERs. Each of these offers different advantages for capturing value from the grid services Sean referenced. If DERs are going to be an important part of future grid operations, then it's really necessary to develop participation models that enable, the various parties in the larger DER ecosystem to play their respective roles. There are currently competing models of how these systems should work together. And today we're going to take a look at two of the most popular, the utility-led model and the aggregator-led model. So in the slide that we're showing now, there's a graphical depiction of the utility-led model. And in this model, the distributed energy resource management systems addresses both bulk and distribution system challenges through comprehensive DER management. I think the primary thing to notice here is that we have both front of the meter and behind the meter DERs that can be aggregated usually by a third party or the utility or system operator itself. And then the utility or system operator can dispatch those aggregated DERs based on their forecasted needs and market inputs. There are several clear advantages to this model. First, because the customers are participating in a single program, there's a streamlined customer experience through uniform program offerings. It's important to note that this is the model that's primarily offered by vertically integrated utilities in the US. Those are the utilities that own generation transmission, and distribution assets. Additional advantages include consistent marketing across the utility service territory. And so a customer within a given utility jurisdiction doesn't have to think about competing offerings, but it's really just one offering that originates primarily from its utility. Another advantage that we see is that there's complete distribution management control for utilities. If they're working with an aggregator and using their DERMS to dispatch DERs, then they have clear and complete visibility into their distribution system and can use the DERs and virtual power plants to dispatch locally. Finally, another clear advantage with the utility-led model is that there can be system-wide optimization of potentially conflicting objectives across generation, transmission, and distribution levels. There are a couple of disadvantages to the utility-led model that I wanted to highlight. First, customers are going to be limited to a single program offering, and that ultimately is going to potentially limit competition and innovation for aggregators. And I think it's also important to note at this point that within the United States and elsewhere, there are obviously different types of customers, and their awareness and knowledge of the energy system can vary greatly. This utility-led model is especially effective for residential customers who may not be as sophisticated when it comes to managing their energy use as many commercial and industrial customers. On the next slide, I'll briefly describe the aggregator-led model. In the aggregator-led model, third-party providers enroll directly with independent system operators or regional transmission organizations in the United States to sell grid services to those markets, while utilities maintain oversight and control over dispatch decisions to ensure that the DER aggregator operations don't have detrimental impacts on the operation of the distribution system. This arrangement features minimal direct utility control of DERs. Instead, it really focuses on wholesale market participation for either capacity or energy value streams. And in some markets in the US, the aggregator-led model can also be used for providing ancillary grid services. That's true in the case of Texas, where there's an energy market. Compared with the utility-led model, the aggregator-led model offers several advantages. First, and primary among those advantages, is that customers will have an expanded choice through competitive offerings. If you're a customer that lives in a jurisdiction where there's an aggregator-led model, there's the potential that you would have multiple aggregators, each competing to provide these VPP services. Another advantage is that there's diversified performance risk. In the aggregator-led model compared to the utility-led model, having multiple aggregators means that you're going to have the ability to diversify the performance risk and that you're not going to be solely reliant on one offering. The aggregator-led model also offers agility in program iteration. I think as Sean noted when he was describing the connected solutions example in Massachusetts, the aggregator-led model really offers the ability for those aggregators to quickly adjust and make changes to programs over time, allowing them the ability to test what's working and what's not, and to make improvements more quickly. There are several disadvantages to the aggregator-led model, especially in comparison to the utility-led model. In some jurisdictions, having competing offerings may lead to customer confusion, especially if customers are used to paying their bill to a utility, and now they're faced with choices among different aggregators. It may not be the easiest thing for them to follow. There can also be inconsistent messaging. Rather than working directly with their utility or energy provider, some of the marketing materials that are provided by DER aggregators may not always be consistent. Among the primary disadvantages is that in the aggregator-led model, there is really limited utility visibility and control over distribution system impacts. Again, because these aggregators or OEMs are working directly with the ISOs and RTOs to defer or to shave peaks at the bulk system level. It really sort of precludes the utility from being able to dispatch those assets locally. That leads to challenges in capturing distribution system benefits. And finally, in the US, with our 50 states and 50 different sets of regulators at the state level, there is limited regulatory oversight of aggregators. There is some oversight at the RTO and ISO levels, but in recent years, there have been examples of aggregators who have misled customers and led to some challenges with those ISOs and RTOs. Finally, on the third slide, I'll briefly describe several hybrid models. I think in the paper that we wrote, we went into some detail about the potential for a hybrid approach to DER program management. And in the paper, we noted it could combine elements of both the utility-led and aggregator-led direct participation models. Hybrid models could maximize the benefits captured across generation, transmission, and distribution value chain. And the idea of hybrid models is conceptually aligned with FERC Order 2222's market participation objectives. This is the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission in the United States, and an order that it passed several years ago, directing the independent system operators and regional transmission operators in the United States to develop market-based rules that would allow for participation at both the distribution and bulk transmission levels within those jurisdictions. Although programs like Connected Solutions in New England incorporate some hybrid elements, as of today, a fully integrated hybrid model remains largely theoretical in the US, although there are some states in the US that are sort of laying the groundwork and taking first steps towards developing these hybrid models. Briefly, I'll just highlight a couple of advantages and disadvantages of these models. Advantages include balanced utility control with competitive market participation and the potential for optimized value capture across multiple value streams. Really, the concept here is that in addition to capturing value from both bulk system, avoided or deferred generation and transmission, you could also capture with more local utility control those distribution system benefits that we often aren't seeing yet in the United States. The primary disadvantages include the potential for double counting resource commitments and conflicting dispatch signals. This really requires careful coordination between the local distribution utility and the independent system operators or RTOs, and clearly define rules to help prevent conflicts. So thank you again for the opportunity to speak this morning. Sean, I'll hand it back over to you, and I look forward to the discussion and the Q&A shortly.
Thank you very much, Lakin. That was great. I want to use your hybrid slide here to preview a topic that I hope we return to at least briefly in section 4 when we apply what we've learned to Thailand circumstances. Some of the planning in Thailand is the best I've ever seen. It's just very thorough at many levels, not just strategically, but from an implementation planning perspective. And they introduced, or the plans presently include the concept of a level 1 aggregator, which is led by utilities, in addition to the concept of a level 2 aggregator, which is led by an independent third party or the market. And so when I observe that in the planning, and then I hear you describe, like in this hybrid model, it feels very similar to what you just described in the United States with FERC Order 2222. There's a desire to incorporate both types of aggregation in the future as VPPs develop. So thank you. I think this is where some of the innovation is likely to show up for many jurisdictions, including Thailand and the US. So the next pair of tables are our best efforts to categorize and to condense a very long list of regulatory topics that we encountered as we did the research for this paper. We easily had a list of 30, maybe 40 discrete issues that regulators have dealt with in their various proceedings across the world. And so we wanted to put them in a sequential order that you could walk through and reduce the number of categories to, I think there's 10 or 11 here in the next 2 slides. And importantly, we're using a model that we noticed the Hawaiian regulators used. They formed key questions before they decided on topics to pursue in their regulatory proceedings. So this is in keeping with that thinking and format. And I, being a grid planner or a resource planner, took a very grid first approach. So that's the first topic you see here. What grid services are actually needed on your particular grid now? Do you have a surplus or deficit of generation capacity? Are you having stability problems at various places on the grid where you need voltage and frequency regulation services? And as soon as you start to identify the grid service, you quickly get into utility planning and the various processes we as professionals, engineers, and economists and attorneys use to plan for a reliable, low-cost service. So forgive me to those of you who think with the customer first. I will get to customer-facing issues at the conclusion of the sequence on the second slide. The other general topic you see in the second row here is technical requirements. There's a very long list here. They generally fall into connection or interconnection issues to the grid. And then, of course, cybersecurity is always very important, not just for reliability's sake, but when you introduce so many small distributed remotely controlled devices, you've got to have a thorough and complete approach to cybersecurity. So there's a series of questions there that may get your regulatory thinking started on these lines. My favorite, of course, is number 3, is an economist's cost-benefit analysis. To me, is central to this entire conversation. And it's not easy work. Generation capacity is the relatively simple one to value, but getting to good estimates of avoided transmission, avoided distribution, avoided ancillary service costs is not easy. And it's very technical and very location specific, yet very necessary if we're going to get a really well-balanced and complete look at what a low-cost system could look like. The fourth row, I won't cover deeply. Lakin just did a great job with the business models. There's 2 central ones with many hybrids as possibilities. But as soon as you get into business models and you start to choose one, you quickly get into procurement decisions. And procurement to me means pricing. Not only the process in which you procure, but what price and volume are you going to offer? You frequently see volume-based goals in megawatts or megawatt hours, but you also see price-based offers, frequently in dollars per kilowatt month or dollars per kilowatt year as either an upfront or performance-based incentive. And then all the hybrids. You can combine volume goals with price-based caps. And the important thing here is to be, back to the simplicity principle, as simple as you can be with this, while acknowledging that avoided costs are a complicated and nuanced topic. And I think pricing and procurement is the next topic to be prepared to investigate. The second half of this table gets into program design and compensation. So some similarities to pricing from the last topic. The program design itself can be very fun and very detailed, but you've got to keep it simple as we discussed in the first section. Same thing with rate design, although I wanted to bring in the experience in the European Union here. They've got a wholesale retail competitive market structure there, and over 400 examples of what they call smart tariffs, or what we call at RAP smart tariffs. They're just combinations of rate designs that are time-based, so think time of use rates, paired with a particular distributed resource, typically the smart thermostat, the vehicle charger, the battery, and so on. And it's that combination, particularly since their natural gas price spike from 2022, that's led to a much faster adoption of DERs and VPPs generally. So I wanted to point out the Europeans' experience. It's been a nice example of rate designs combined with program designs to get VPPs to grow. Then, of course, cost recovery. This primarily applies to utility-led model where you've got cost of service, rate case type procedures to recover costs. You need to think those through. But as you'll see with Australia, that's a cost recovery through market mechanisms and through settlement mechanisms between parties at the wholesale level. So quite a different set of cost recovery issues depending on your market structure and business model. I mentioned enrollment with the Venn diagram from Tesla. That's got to be kept simple, both for the customer and for the aggregator. Data access and privacy, big issue. This is a balance as regulators. We have to make enrollment easy while simultaneously protecting customer privacy and ensuring data access for those aggregators to do what they do, which is create a business case for their own firm. And then lastly, evaluation, measurement, and verification. This is an acknowledgement that the best programs anywhere, whether they be demand response or energy efficiency or wholesale market operations, they all have their version of evaluation, measurement, and verification that doesn't just measure impact in terms of kilowatts of capacity and kilowatt hours of energy impact, but also process best practices. What can be done better during the next cycle? So EM&V is meant to capture both types of independent evaluation. So with this, I'd like to cover two examples, one from Australia, one from Hawaii. Australia being the market-led model, Hawaii being the utility-led model. I'll present a few slides here with Australia first, then I'll transition to my colleague Jay Griffin here at RAP to describe Hawaii. And the point here is not to tell you all the details of how their programs work. I'm going to go very high level with that. The observations I want to emphasize are regulatory process, number one. And I'll just give you the answer here before we get into the slides. We didn't find any differences in regulatory process. Australia, for example, followed its standard procedure with respect to stakeholder engagement and quasi-judicial proceedings. And the same thing was true in Hawaii. They followed their customary regulatory processes. So what that leaves us with is a focus again on topics. I just finished a top 10 list of topics that are kind of broad. The point of this section is to make them more specific to Australia's topics that they dealt with and Hawaii's that they dealt with. So these are the key features of what changed ultimately in Australia in their market-led model. And there's a bit of history here. In December 2024, so just about a year ago, the Australian Energy Market Commission finalized a rule change. And this enabled aggregated customer energy resources, such as batteries, EVs, including demand response, to actively participate in their national energy market. And they called it their dispatch mode rule. And all it did was allow smaller distributed assets to be scheduled in the same way that large generators get scheduled, where they submit bids to the market operator every day. They receive dispatch instructions back from that operator. And the matching up of supply and demand through that auction system sets price and ultimately provides a variety of grid services. So the intent here on the part of the regulator was to create a level playing field for all energy resources, which improves competition and helps them develop more flexibility in their grid operation and dispatch. So back to the three features, they felt like voluntary opt-in was an important principle to follow. They wanted everybody to be able to compete, but it wasn't compulsory to offer your resource in. And then the second one I think is pretty central, and this is another principle we tried to follow as we applied what we learned in Thailand. Then in Australia, they tried to build on their existing rules. They wanted to keep the same structure in place because it was working for them. In their case, it meant using bidirectional framework that keeps very small resource classifications largely as they are. You'll see in some of our thinking for the Thailand application of this work, we're accepting their business model as is and trying to fit greater VPP adoption into it and policy into it. And lastly, flexible participation. It's much similar to the first box in many ways, but they wanted to let resources come in and out without setting a lot of rigid rules that got them committed for long periods of time. So this concept of flexible participation was important. The biggest thing that changed in my view was a simple but not universal change that's going on in our industry. In the left-hand box, you've got what I would characterize as a standard connection point configuration where you have a single retail meter measuring the connection point between the grid and a building. And as we all know, there's multiple end uses within every building. And if there happens to be a controllable resource in that building, the system operators can't see that through a single measuring point very easily. It's kind of masked by the other end uses behind that meter. So as a principle, they developed a secondary settlement point configuration, which is straightforward. They introduced the requirement for submetering on the end use that is being controlled or dispatched. In this depiction, that's a battery. And what that enabled was the wholesale market operator to treat these small resources in the same way in which they treat large ones. They're measurable, they're settlable in a financial sense through the wholesale market. So seemingly simple change, but really important and foundational to integrating the smaller scale resources into Australia's markets here. So the topics that Australia dealt with, again, another top 10 list here, we're trying to condense a wide array of topics down. Very wholesale market focused thinking here. They first thought of market scheduling and price formation. They wanted to, increase market efficiency by including more and more resources into the bidding process. We've already mentioned system and cybersecurity and the high-level principles that showed up here as well in Australia. The concept of technology and competitive neutrality. They wanted to write rules that were broad enough that new technology could come along, new ways of structuring VPPs could come along and it would fit. That's challenging to future-proof your designs, but it was an objective on the part of the Australian regulators. We've already mentioned voluntary participation and participant flexibility. Compliance and enforcement was big here. Wholesale market operators are operating a lot like a financial clearinghouse as well as a physical place of dispatch. And so compliance and enforcement is really important for both those functions to perform well. Demand forecast accuracy. This shows up a lot. As you get better data or data for the first time on behind the meter resources, you've got an opportunity to do much better with your demand forecasting. And so that was a big topic for Australia as well. Access to ancillary services markets. This goes to frequency and voltage regulation, which batteries are so good at doing. So it isn't just about energy or just about capacity and peak shaving anymore. I've mentioned settlement and cost allocation. Those are back office functions for wholesale grid operators. Consumer protection showed up here, which I was really pleased to see. How should we as regulators approach this topic and protect both the customer's interest and the aggregator's interest and the utility and non-participating customer's interest? There's at least 3 or 4 dimensions of consumer protection here that can be looked at. And then finally, you see a topic about implementation complexity. You want to keep it as simple as possible, and to the degree it is complicated, you need to provide some time to transition to the new scheme. So that can take the form of grandfathering the old system for some period of time, or just being slow and deliberate in your transition to a new set of rules, in this case, the dispatch mode rule. So with that, I'd like to transition over to my colleague, Jay Griffin. He is the former chair of the Hawaii Public Utilities Commission, and he's presently the head of RAP's US program, and he'll take you through the next few slides to describe Hawaii's experience. Over to you, Jay.
Thanks, Sean. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to give you an overview, as Sean said, of some of our VPP experience in Hawaii. My time at the Hawaii Commission straddles some of the material that I'm going to talk about. So during my time, we initiated a number of these dockets, and I'm going to tell you about some of the results that occurred after I've left. But before we get into I do want to step back and give you a very broad swath overview of the current energy situation in Hawaii that'll help you understand why VPPs are such a promising solution here, which sounds like you have a lot of parallels in Thailand. So happy to take questions on that when we get to it. But first, this is an island state. All of the fossil fuel resources are imported here, which primarily takes the form of oil, imported from all over the world to the most isolated, populated island chain in the world. So our energy prices are high. We're very vulnerable to supply disruptions. And so for a long time, our state has been trying to use policies to get away from that level of dependency. We operate 6 different island grids in varying sizes. I'm located on the island of Oahu, the most populated island. We have about a 1,200 megawatt grid here, it's about 1.4 million people. But we have several islands that are much, much smaller. And when you look at some of the details of these programs, you'll see that at least in the pricing and the tiered pricing structure changes, and that just takes into consideration the different characteristics of our system. So we have 2 to 3 islands that are much, much smaller, only a few thousand people, only a few megawatts on each of these islands. When we talk about VPPs, an important thing to consider why I thought it was such an important resource that we needed to consider as we did our transition here away from fossil fuels. We have a number of older, very old, 50 to 70-year-old power plants that we are in the process of transitioning away from. So those plants are in the process of retiring. They're being replaced by a whole suite of resources, including some new flexible dispatchable generation, a large amount of utility scale wind, solar with batteries. But we already are the state with the highest level of rooftop solar paired with storage. So if you look at, we already have almost 20% of our peak demand covered by, or the capacity available with customers that own rooftop solar and storage. So really it's a case here. Most of those systems are not enrolled in VPPs now. So people have installed those just to offset their own energy use and to have a backup power supply if and when the grid fails. So really the case in Hawaii is, how do we get those customers to enroll in a VPP? They already have solar plus storage, or as they're installing those today, how do we make sure that that's dispatchable by the utility to offset some of these other costs? So think of it this way: the resource is already out there. How do we best tap it? And it's already growing. It's not the case in most of the United States. That is the case in other parts of the world. My understanding from what Sean said, you're in Thailand, you're in that process now, seeing strong adoption of rooftop solar and electric vehicles. So some of those considerations are the same. How do you make sure that as customers are buying and installing these technologies, how do we get them to enroll and be a better part of the grid system? So with that background, I want to talk about, Sean has framed up some of the regulatory considerations that we looked at as we developed these programs or started that process. And I just want to keep in mind that this was over, like, the whole time frame of our solar adoption has been over about 15 years. We've gone through several phases of very rapid growth, programs changed, and the terms of how people bought and invested in those systems has changed over time. And this docket that we opened in 2019 was to really rationalize it and consolidate there are a number of diverse programs, and to develop long-term structures to bring a level of market consistency and stability that was highlighted in some of the earlier slides. So this was something that we started in 2019 to rationalize a lot of the things that were already happening and to build a more durable framework for future investment in solar and storage here in the state of Hawaii. So this docket started in September of 2019. The questions highlighted here were the considerations that we put to the parties as we opened this up. And as you can see here, we asked people, what are the types of programs? What are the types of rate designs we should look at? How should we, a question here, this is the question of rationalizing. How do we take what had already been in place and transition into a more stable framework for the future? And then these last two questions are about some of the technological questions. So we started the proceeding broadly, asked folks these questions, and then organized the work into 3 different working groups. We had a program track that looked at the program design questions related to the new solar storage programs and VPP programs, a technical track that looked very closely at all the different technical questions, particularly at advanced inverter standards, and then a rate design track that looked just primarily at the different rate design offerings for consumption of energy. Sean, if we want to step forward here. So the last slide showed the broad questions that we put to the parties. This is the summary of how we've categorized some of the different topics that we talked about that aligns with the earlier slide that Sean had shown in the VPP planning overview. So how do we look at how these programs align with grid service, what grid services are needed? How does that tie to utility planning? In our case, as I alluded to, our big challenge here was the transition away from these very old steam-fired generation units into each of these islands dominated by variable renewable energy sources, and how can the VPPs themselves be a part of the solution in that transition really was the fundamental question in the first topic here. Second one is looking at what are the types of designs and compensation schemes to support that. Rate design looked primarily at the consumption side of the meter. How does that align with any sort of generation technologies behind the meter? And these last 3 are on technical requirements, cost recovery of the different investments needed to support the DERs, and transition plan. This was quite a significant question because, as I said, we'd had over a 10-year period as we transitioned and created new temporary programs, and how would those merge into and align with a future the enduring sustainable program. Let's see. Next slide, Sean. Okay, so if we look at, as we develop the different programs, largely this aligned into 2 levels of what was known as the Smart DER tariff. And the DER tariff was just an export-based generation tariff. And we'll talk about in a second, another layer on top of that is the VPP enrollment program. And so this tariff is just addressing the rates of compensation for new types of rooftop solar systems. So there were two versions of that, 2 flavors to think about. One is just a straight non-export system. So this had been a very popular program where the customer installs solar plus storage, and all they're doing is self-consuming behind the meter. This provides the terms and conditions to do that, and gives in some cases a more expedited track for interconnection when you're just self-consuming behind the meter. But if you're doing that, that's not exactly the most mutually beneficial for everyone else on the system. So we also developed a future export-based rider, and you'll see that this created 3 time varying rates for exports of energy for anything beyond what's self-consumed at the house. And what you'll see, so it's already a high solar system, and so these are 5 of the 6 islands in the state of Hawaii. Go back one, yeah. So for the Smart DER tariff, we had 3 different timeframes, and really what you'll see is in the middle of the day, since these are already very highly saturated solar systems, very much lower export rates in the middle of the day, and higher rates in the evening peak time. So really the incentive here is just most of the systems installed today, over 90%, even if you're just using and exporting energy or combined with storage. So that allows you to consume it during the evening peak, have backup power available. And if you do end up exporting any times where you have a excess of generation, it's encouraging you to do that during the evening peak time when the grid needs it the most. Okay, so this was just our export-based long-term smart DER tariff. This took the place of, there were 5 or 6 different transitional programs, and they've all merged into the smart DER tariff. The additional layer on top of this, that was the intent of setting up this rate, or the design here, was what was termed the bring your own device tariff. This was the program-based, as Sean alluded to, utility-led VPP program. So these create additional levels or opportunities for compensation for you if you enroll at these different levels. So the first one is actually just a scheduled dispatch where and these are all designed to work with solar plus storage. The system is programmed to reduce its energy use from the grid by self-consuming from the battery for 2 hours during the evening peak. And the utility tells you which of the 2 hours over are longer peak. And these additional levels within that were designed into the bring your own device tariff have increasing levels of utility control and dispatch. I want to be careful in that this was the final terms of the decision by the commission in late 2023. And so the smart DER tariff has seen very strong adoption. This bring your own device tariff has yet to really take hold within the marketplace here. And this gets to the Venn diagram that Sean had shown earlier. You need to align the simplicity, the program structure, profitability to all folks, durability, I believe, or consistency. And what we've seen was, I think, a good intent by the commission to make sure that the compensation levels are well within the avoided costs so that there would be benefits to everyone. But the complexity of the terms of the program and the relatively low levels of compensation relative to just self-consuming, there had not been very strong interest in the program. It's been revised twice since the decision 2023, and the commission is about to embark on a new initiative to revise and overhaul the terms of the bring your own device tariff here. And they're looking very closely at the Connected Solutions program that was discussed earlier. So I guess I step back and look at it from my perspective. The structure, the idea of layering in kind of an energy-based tariff with these are basically capacity-based VPP programs, it's shown, we've seen it here before. We've shown that opportunity works, but it's got to work for the customer signing up for this. And we haven't really seen the terms of this BYOD tariff hit that traction point yet. I think the intent in the next year is that the commission will do it. The need is very acute here. As I talked about earlier, we are in the process of transitioning, retiring a number of our older power plants. So the significant amount of capacity just ready and available from customers is a very compelling proposition. But it takes the time and the effort to finalize and find the sweet spot with all these details. Let's see, Sean, I think that is.
Thank you, Jay. Yeah.
The remaining pieces for this part. Happy to take questions or have part of our discussion. And then we'll see where we go.
Thank you very much, Jay. I just had one quick slide to offer some comparisons really between Australia and Hawaii, and then we'll open it up for Q&A here. The topics are similar in some points and different in others. So our effort here with this table was to look at the procedural elements that were shared and to compare and contrast them at a high level here. So Market structure goes without saying. Australia's market-led versus Hawaii's utility-led are different, and the lead buyer, the lead entity is different, which goes hand in hand with that. You got a lead with the market operator versus the lead of the distribution utility. The central mechanism, of course, is different. You're bidding in assets into a wholesale market in the case of Australia, whereas the utility's really soliciting what it wants in terms of grid services from its distribution customers and their aggregators in the case of the utility-led model. Dispatch process, very transparent, very price-based in the market-led model. In the vertically integrated context, it's usually not quite as transparent, and the utility is really sending what I'd characterize as predominantly one-way signals to the aggregators to get the services they need, whereas the market-led is a little bit more of a two-way interaction. Revenue source, a little different. Wholesale markets are just bringing buyers and sellers together, and that voluntary exchange through the wholesale market operator really provides the revenue source for aggregators under the market-led model. It's a good deal simpler in the utility-led model. It's the utility itself through its own cost recovery processes that are usually through a service agreement. Sometimes it will be called a purchase power agreement to compensate the aggregators. And then coming down a level with respect to customer compensation, Jay just covered how it can be structured a couple of different ways in the Hawaii context. That's a really nice couple of examples in my experience in that context. And the point I think Lakin made in the market-based model is it just gets much more innovative, more variety in the market context. And lastly, the primary regulatory focus, this is my interpretation. When you're a wholesale market operator, you're really focused on competitive neutrality, efficient price formation, economically efficient, and making sure your participants are flexibly able to participate in what you're offering. The utility-led model is different, and that it's very utility planning and operations-based. Retail rate design becomes important, and balancing all the factors that we balance in the vertically integrated context. So with that, Becky, I open it up to your leadership for a Q&A session, and then we'll move into section 4.
Thank you, Sean, and thank you to Jay and Lakin for that robust presentation. Your enthusiasm for this topic is coming through so clearly. I'm sure there's so much more we could chat about, but we do have some questions coming in from our audience. First, we have a question. Can VPPs provide both value of demand reduction and creation? If this focuses on demand reduction, how is VPP different from demand response?
Thank you for the question. I'm reminded of the slide where I attempted to contrast the two. They have a tremendous amount in common, particularly on the demand side. So a lot of similarities across demand response versus VPPs. What is different, though, is scale and size. VPPs are smaller, and they're frequently storage based now, so they're not just on the demand side. They're playing that intermediate role between demand and supply with storage in the middle now. And there's a nuance here, and I'm struggling to convey it, but the flexibility is such that these demand side resources can provide what were traditionally supply side grid services. I'm thinking of all the grid services, not just peak shaving and load shifting and shedding, but the short time scale voltage and frequency response. That's being provided by these VPPs from a demand side perspective, or in the case of the battery, that intermediate storage role. And that's new. That's my characterization of the present state of the differences. I'd open it up to my colleagues for additional insights. But
yeah, I'll just add, because I just want to clarify. I thought the way I heard the question, Becky, was looking at both the value of demand reduction, but what we've called here load build, which is also the ability to add load at certain times of the day. And certainly on small grids, they're actually both super valuable. So the demand reduction we've seen is in a traditional sense. We have evening peaks here, that's stressing the total capacity on the grid. So you have certain times of the year where that's super valuable, or increasingly, really the challenge is the net peaks, which are times where you're caught short on capacity, and that's where the dispatchability is super important. And we've seen events here like that where it's not normally your seasonal peak that is a challenging period. We've had generators break down certain we get windy low wind days, so the ability to just have a dispatchable resource with the batteries when you need it, call on it. So the demand reduction super valuable. But one of our more constraining time periods, as I had shown, is the middle of the day, when we have to turn all of the rest of the generators down on the island. So you hit these minimum generation constraints. So the idea of having load build and add load is super valuable. It keeps you from curtailing other sources of energy. And you have a wide range of possible end uses to do that. Batteries are one, but this is a great application: electric vehicles, some of the thermal storage that Sean showed about. The shifted energy company here is specialized in that they have controllable water heaters, so that when you, in the middle of the day when we actually need load. So I think, it's the two sides of that coin here: ability to reduce demand and increase demand, and have that as the utility needs it, is one of the super valuable aspects of the VPP.
Great, thank you for that. Great explanation. Follow-up question: when VPPs, or the transmission system operator or the aggregator, decide to deliver the dispatch order to DERs, is it price level in wholesale markets or TSOs that determine based on supply and demand situation? What is the dispatching mechanism?
Question. So we're in the market model here. The first step is for all of the resources to make an offer, to make a bid, to say, I'm willing to supply my resource for some price in dollars per megawatt hour. And what the wholesale market operator does with that is it takes that in, stacks it up lowest to highest, and compares it to its load. And it has a load forecast that is also sometimes bid in, but can also just be forecast independently, of course. And it's that intersection of supply and demand that determines how far up what we call the bid stack supply and demand meet. And so the dispatch order that comes back out of the market operator is for everybody who is at or below a particular threshold where demand and supply met. And so that's an example of the two-way mechanism. The resources bid in, the market operator does the matching and dispatching. It's all security and transmission constrained dispatch, of course, and then communicates it back out, often on a day ahead basis, but also in near real time to keep the system in balance. I hope that addresses the question. If there's other angles to it, as Jay just had good ears for, I'd welcome other explanations.
Well, I think you gave a good explanation of kind of the overall structure of the market-based program. I can just say, in the utility-led one, the version of it is that at least what I had alluded to was the smart export tariff is basically a price-based signal, just for when you're using the solar plus storage combined. And so you saw, the really high peak, the rate for any exports during the peak. So there's just a natural incentive to self-consume, or if you are having access to dispatch it at the peak. And then the VPP aspect it's a utility led. It's dispatched by the utility, under the different terms and conditions that you sign up for. So the original structure had 3 different services, or kind of levels or flavors. The first one was just scheduled, and then increasing levels of utility control and dispatch. And as I alluded to, I think the really valuable ones here are just to have a level of control and dispatch to use at the peak, but even increasingly this idea of net peaks, so that you have some any of the times you hit emergency conditions, basically you have a resource available. And so in our case, that's not always in the evenings at the highest system demand of the day. We hit different emergency conditions as we've been transitioning generators off the system and bringing new resources online. So I think that certain level of controllability and call on relatively short notice, a few hours ahead or an hour and ahead, and have some utility-led aspect help, or utility-led aspect of it helps, so they know they actually have a certain amount of megawatts on call, and can, that goes into their unit commitment and operational decisions. So I think, the price and the controllability aspect, or the layering of that, gives different types of values.
Great. Thank you. And Jay, we're coming back to you. We've got a question about Hawaii. Since the Hawaii payment to DERs is based on avoided cost, how frequently does the tariff need to be updated to reflect the fuel cost?
Oh, you're gonna catch me on that's a really good question. And well, this is where I started this, but I wasn't there for the final decision, but I'm gonna go off of what I remember. Well, one thing that was important is that those rates that were finally set were based on a forward-looking forecast of avoided cost. And I believe, I can't remember if it was a 5-year or a 7-year period. So when you signed up in that time frame, like, those are the rates for a certain amount of time for that time frame. So it's not varying, month by month or year by year. So you have a certain level of consistency based on a forward projection of avoided costs at that time. The update time, I believe, I'll have to double check this and I can point it, but I believe it was every 3 years, those rates would be updated. And then those become, when you enroll at that time, that becomes the new offering. But the 3-year period, I'll have to catch my details. But yeah, the idea is to keep a certain level of consistency for a time when you sign up, and then it would be updated periodically subsequent to that time period, and then when you enroll in at different times into the smart DER tariff.
And Jay, I just want to add to that in my region, the 6 New England states in the Northeast US do estimate or re-estimate their forward-looking avoided cost every 3 years. So it's a very clear cycle here. It sounds like it matches Hawaii's.
In our case,
Great.
what the system, the way it is now, is different than some of the earlier programs. We actually looked at backwards looking avoided cost based primarily on oil. The important thing here is the forward-looking projection incorporated. There's a ton of new utility scale solar and storage going in particularly. So I think the idea was to make sure that the DER rates were, factoring in the lower avoided costs based on the new projects going in.
Okay, I'm sure we could keep talking about this for so much more time than we have, and I'm sorry to be cutting us short. I'm going to pose one more question for you, and then we'll turn it over to our next section. So what is the role of electricity retail tariff pricing structure for enhancing or hindering DER participation?
I'll do this quickly. I know Jay will have some more color in the Hawaii context. It's very complementary. I view them, retail pricing, as a complement to program design, as a complement to wholesale markets in the case of Australia, in the case of the European Union. So they really go hand in hand. You do see them operating separately sometimes, but my effort to try and very quickly summarize the European Union's experience is my best example, where you've got retail price offerings on the part of the aggregators matched up with DERs that either get a discounted price for participating in a particular smart tariff or a rebate. There's lots of ways to structure our pricing, but it's really the combination of the two that's worked well for the Europeans.
Yeah, I have a really good question. The interaction is critical, right? Because as you're buying, you install solar and storage, you're offsetting retail consumption, and so the value of that is really what the the values of your retail tariff. When we set up the docket that we had talked about, I'd alluded to, there was an advanced rate design track looking at consumption rates. We had gone a long way down the path of also creating a parallel three time varying rates for retail consumption. And that was to avoid a lot of the or at least to try and match those periods and the retail consumption rates with what the export rates are. That the commission has pulled back on that, and just because my take, it's just challenging to change retail rates for everyone, including the folks that in this case the idea was to change it for all customers, to give them an incentive for different types of DER devices, not necessarily just solar plus storage, but really complicated, challenging to do that in the context of a investor-owned utility to change everyone's rates to a certain structure. So we've gone to the time varying export rates for DER customers, but still a straight flat fixed rate for retail consumption. Sean's right. When you look at fully retail competitive markets, they offer like hundreds of different flavors of these, and the opportunity to pair different consumption rates with smart DER tariffs, and the retailers taking the risk on that, where the regulators here, it's the rest of customers that take the risk when you mess this up. And so I would say we're in the middle of that process, but still really, I mean, it is like the full complementarity of the retail consumption rate with whatever DER value that you have.
Okay. Not so simple answers to some really simple questions.
Hard. It's really important, but hard to do, I think, is my answer.
Yes. I just keep hearing in my head over this whole conversation, something you started with, Sean, of it needs to be simple and consistent. And that was a message I just heard over and over again throughout all of this. So I hate to be the person to cut off the conversation, but that's my job today. So we are going to pause on Q&A. If we have time at the end, we will come back to the remaining questions. But I think I'm turning it back over to you, Sean, to bring this down to the specific regulatory context in Thailand and what the recommendations are for them to move forward.
Yes, thank you very much, Becky. My apologies to everybody. I have spoken for too long. So I just have 4 slides here. I'm going to emphasize this one. I'm going to go light on the next 2, and then emphasize our recommendations so that we can leave the panel the maximum amount of time. So Thailand has what they call an enhanced single buyer model. And the way it's organized is that you have a state-owned, vertically integrated system, and the key player is the Electric Generating Authority of Thailand, or EGAT. They're responsible in this big central blue box for generating electricity, for operating the transmission system. They're also the owner of that system and the owner of about 1/3 of all the generation capacity. At the distribution level, underneath EGAT, you see the Metropolitan Electricity Authority and the Provincial Electricity Authority. These are the distribution utilities and the sole retailers in Thailand. In terms of government oversight, the distribution utilities are supervised by the Ministry of the Interior, while EGAT is a state enterprise under the Ministry of Energy. So in simple terms, almost all electricity in Thailand is sold into and through EGAT. And there are some exceptions here that this depiction shows. You've got independent power producers that sell directly to EGAT, but you've also got small power producers in that upper left box that can sell either to EGAT or directly to some large end users. And then there's another category on the upper right, the very small power producers. These are less than 10 megawatts, predominantly renewable suppliers, and they sell to the distribution utilities. And I think there's maybe 1/5, no more than a quarter of the generation is transacted through that program. So when we looked at the structure and applied what we learned through the research, we immediately found ourselves in the utility-led model. We think that is the most natural fit, and kind of the following that principle of taking the existing structure as it is because it's working well already, And we asked ourselves, what can we do with the utility-led model to be helpful in the Thailand context? So as I mentioned earlier, Thailand's got some of the best planning and some of the fantastic experience with demand response that I've seen. They've got a 10-year history of a variety of demand response pilots. In part, that activity was driven by gas supply crises. Importantly, these pilots have been both at the residential and industrial scales. And this is where I'll cut myself short. There's a really great history here, but I want to jump to the bottom graphic here. There was a wonderful publication. I'm going to scroll down on my notes here so I can get it right. I don't have it exactly. Suffice it to say that the School of Renewable Energy and Smart Grid Technology, in partnership with a co-author at Provincial Electricity Authority, had a nice 2023 publication of the history of demand response in Thailand. And they came up with 5 really policy recommendations. And 4 of these 5, we're in complete alignment here with the research we found. Having clear policy and long-term stability and consistency planning is super important. Data access and sharing, that's a technical aspect that's super important. Skipping over markets for a moment, incentives need to be attractive. They need to be simple, as we've talked about. And then collaboration, this is a theme maybe we haven't emphasized enough here, but across all stakeholders, it's really key. This stuff is complicated and you need to have the subject matter experts in good alignment to get policies to work out. Where we found ourselves taking pause and thinking through the nuances on this market recommendation, we like the enhanced single buyer market structure, and we think it's already in good alignment with utility-led models. We understand it. So rather than change that, and you certainly could change it if you wish and follow a more market-oriented approach, we said, no, we think the utility-led model is appropriate here. This is another example of some of the great planning at the strategic level here. And I want to point out that although VPPs don't appear explicitly in a box here, they're directly related to number 1, demand response, to number 4, energy storage systems, and certainly to number 5, EV integration. Forgive me, I don't have time to talk through this slide, but this is just an example of how Thailand does such a good job, not only at the strategic level of planning, but bringing it down to the project management and implementation level of planning. It's broken out into phases where you've just finished the foundational readiness phase, and are preparing presently to integrate private market actors in the midterm, and working towards, of course, full commercialization. So this is the last slide. These are the 4 recommendations we're offering up for consideration in the Thailand context. The first one on the left is to continue with a potential study for flexibility with an emphasis on the distribution grid. There's already a great and pretty current potential study for demand response, but for lack of data, it stops short of trying to value distribution level benefits. And that's so important to the cost benefit equation, as I tried to illustrate early in the presentation. VPPs are resources on the distribution grid, and they often can have a big piece of value there. So doing a potential study and getting the avoided costs at that level are important. I won't reemphasize the utility-led business model, but it's just about figuring out what unique combination of roles and responsibilities you want your market actors to hold within that model. And I want to signal my own sense of neutrality. This doesn't have to be the distribution utility. EGAT, as the plans have indicated, has a demand response control center already established. There's plenty of room within the business model to place the market actors in appropriate places and apply the model. Third recommendation is a friendly attempt to say, hey, there's some thinking called distributed capacity procurement that seems to be in really good alignment with the utility-led model. The strength of the planning in Thailand is already very high through the EPPO office. The utilities themselves are doing their own versions of transmission distribution planning. The basic thrust of distribution capacity procurement is really twofold. It's to take that planning and link it up with the procurement process. And secondly, to use existing cost recovery mechanisms. I don't think you need to change very much to apply this idea of cost recovery and procurement as it's envisioned with distributed capacity procurement. And I want to bring back the planning concept of level 1 and level 2 aggregators here. This DCP is open to both sequentially, meaning utilities can lead it as aggregators first in the level 1 aggregation sense, but they can also open up to third parties in a level 2 aggregation sense and almost run them in parallel. It's not an incompatible hybrid, and that's really the spirit in which this is brought forward as a potential hybrid that seems to fit well with the jurisdiction. And then finally, working groups. This is one way to express stakeholder engagement processes that are so important when you're dealing with a high number of technical issues and a number of market actors, all of whose interests need to be well served. So with that, I think I'm turning it over to Alejandra for our panel discussion.
Thanks a lot for that. Thanks a lot to our speakers for these great presentations. Thanks, Sean. Thanks, Lacking. Jay, thanks for being so late. We understand that these are ungodly hours for you. Thanks for all this. So let me go very quickly to our panel. We will introduce our panelists. We have a fantastic roster of experts that will talk today with us. I would like to ask them if they can turn on their mics and their videos. So, and let me introduce them very briefly. Well, first of all, we have Mr. Lackengard, who has been already presented today, who was one of the speakers, and who will be also part of the panel. We have also Mr. Pierpat Vitayes Rusarion, a former colleague and a very good friend. He's senior energy analyst at the International Energy Agency, where he leads the work on power and system integration. Joining us as well today is Mr. Surat Asvapo-Sitkul. He's an expert at the Advanced Power System Technology Division at the Electricity Generating Authority of Thailand, EGAT. And last but not least, we have Mr. Grayson Hefner, who is a very experienced expert. He's a utility modernization and power trade consultant. So without further ado, I will start with a set of questions. I will start with Laken. Laken, today we have discussed two versions of the business models. No, we have one that is basically utility-led, and then there is more market-led business models. Are there any variations of these business models that you have seen or envisioned? And if so, how they have come about and how do they work?
Sure. Thank you for the question, Alejandro, and for the opportunity to speak. I think the U.S. experience has really been rooted in either a utility-led model or the aggregator-led model. And I think here in the U.S., we are starting to see, more hybrid models being adopted. It's still the early stages. The best examples are, connected solutions in New England, where we're beginning to see, some of the states and the utilities within those states start to, dispatch VPPs for distribution system constraints. Texas is another example, which is an energy market in the United States, where you have both ERCOT, the system operator in Texas, as well as individual retail utilities. And there's a lot of competition right now among the retail electricity providers in Texas to provide VPPs to their customers. Outside of the U.S., I think one thing I would want to highlight and speak about briefly, we mentioned this in our paper, Decoding DERMS, but there is sort of the economic argument that considers a purely price-driven model where utilities provide market signals through dynamic rates designed to incentivize DERs to deliver grid services when and where they're needed. This, at the bulk system level, this market-driven pricing-based model has gained traction in places like Texas, as well as parts of Europe, with varying levels of success. I think one of the biggest challenges with the dynamic pricing model only is that it really has an inability to enforce physical grid constraints through pricing alone, and to really provide any guarantee that DERs will deliver the grid services, exactly when and where they are needed.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for this. Now we'll go to our next panelist with one question, Pierre Pat. For planners, the amount of demand-side resources that we can actually know to be available, but it's quite uncertain, especially when they haven't been deployed. And this creates a sort of a cycle in which resources such as VPPs are not considered into planning, and since they're not considered into planning, there are no actions to implement them. Do you have any suggestions to address this?
Thank you for that, Alejandro, and thanks for your invite to participate. I think that it's a great question because we have also been talking about, the way that we need to change how we plan, like considering integrated planning, not just on the supply side, but also on the demand side. And I think many countries, and also including Thailand, has been considering this aspect. And I think IEA is also doing one of the projects under the 3DEN, looking at demand side flexibility, how that can be incorporated into planning. And I also want to highlight that based on our latest World Energy Outlook, which was recently released last week, it highlights the rapid growth of demand in Southeast Asia, and that's including Thailand, which is driven by air conditioning, the increased electrifications in industry and transport sector through which is electric vehicles. And with the growth of solar generation that is expected, these demand side resources can provide flexibility to the grid, ranging across different time frame, which is we have been discussing in terms of providing resource adequacy, reserve capacity, various ancillary services across different time zones. So I think it's quite important for these aspects of the demand side to be integrated into the planning framework, the overall planning framework, not only just supply side and also from the demand side, but not just in terms of energy or capacity that they can provide, but also in terms of the services. Because as we know, EV battery storage can provide frequency regulations, fast reserve response in the time range from seconds to minutes. And then we have this industrial load and air conditioning, which can be useful on a more of a longer term, like hourly to daily time scales. So I think these are important that because this resource can help Thailand to manage high share variable renewables in a way that is effective in terms of the cost and also support the reliability of the system and the stability, which need to be integrated into the overall planning of the countries. I'll cut it short here.
Thanks a lot, Pierre. Mr. Surat, my question would be for you, I mean, from the point of view of the utility from EGAT. As we integrate more distributed resources, we may encounter more and more often that there are two-way power flows, and they might have an increasing impact on the transmission system. So what are the main prerequisites for establishing visibility, to give visibility in particular to the National Control Center, such that the system operator can make a good forecast and balance the grid without data bottlenecks?
Okay, thank you so much for the question. So, I think for like the increasing of the DRs, we have to accept that we're gonna have like a two-way power flow from the distribution network to the transmission system level. So, for the data visibility, I think first for EGAT point of view, we need to, like currently we have seen only the net load, the load that we measure at the transmission level. We can't see the very small power producers and the impact of the solar rooftop. in the distribution levels. So I think for the transmission system operator, we need this kind of information, so that like for the security power system operation, we can use this data to kind of develop or forecast the actual demand, or what will, like, how much generation that we will have from the solar rooftop, because different resources, like for example the demand or solar rooftop, you have different level of the uncertainties. So we need this kind of visibility for the system operator to see it and to forecast it, so that we can secure our power system. Yeah, I think that is my perspective. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. Grayson, I would like to ask you, as you, many of you are aware, Thailand has one of the fastest growing EV markets in Southeast Asia, and it's enabling by domestic manufacturing capacity, consumer habits, and industrial policy. What kind of opportunities do you see, for Thailand and for the growth of e-mobility that is kind of offer to virtual power plants?
Thanks, Alejandro, and thanks to the organizers, RAP and RETA, and the sponsor ERC for inviting the panelists to participate. So indeed, Thailand has one of the fastest growing EV markets in Southeast Asia. EV passenger vehicles are expected to top 100,000 in 2025, which is reaching about 20% of new passenger vehicle sales, and expecting to keep growing over the next 5 years and reach 300,000 by 2030, which is 30% of passenger vehicles sold. So this rapid growth creates great opportunities for utilities to utilize the distributed energy resource inherent in EV battery storage. We've heard about the potential use cases for VPPs, and they certainly apply to EV bidirectional battery charging, demand side management, reducing peak loads, providing grid resiliency services, and so on. Utilities around the world are working to demonstrate the potential of EVs and virtual power plants, and in fact, EGAT is a leader in this area. A team from EGAT's Renewable Energy and Digital Utility Business Development Unit has worked with the EGAT's Demand Response Center to prove the concept of bidirectional management of EV batteries in response to grid operator commands. This unit has also engaged with Thailand's OEM car manufacturers to encourage inclusive bidirectional charging capability needed for both vehicle-to-house and vehicle-to-grid integration into EV passenger vehicles sold here in Thailand. Thanks to rising global interest, several EV models sold in Thailand, some of the leading models, BYD, MG, Hyundai, and Kia, are now bidirectional charge-discharge ready. So let me just tell you what that might mean for a virtual power plant. EGAT planning calls for a 1,000 unit vehicle-to-house pilot project in 2026, which will take advantage of Thailand's existing time of use tariffs to provide arbitrage. And if successful, the pilot projects will be expanded to grid scale, 100,000 units plus, possibly in 2027 and beyond. A back of the envelope calculation suggests that 400,000 EVs with 5 kW capacity and 5 hours storage could deliver up to 2 gigawatts of peaking capacity and 10 gigawatt hours of storage. For comparison, the current target for demand response in Thailand's 2025 power development plan is 2 gigawatts. So in fact, there's a real potential for VGH to take up quite a bit of the demand response targets that EGAT has set. So pretty exciting stuff, and definitely, I think we're all interested in seeing these developments move forward. Thank you.
Certainly, this sounds like a great opportunity. So let me go to a very quick second round of questions for all of you. I'm coming back to Laken. So Laken, you have already discussed a bit. If you could provide some more details, like what is the primary value that you see for that VPPs are providing today to utilities, and how do you think this will be changing in the future?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Alejandro. And I'll try to be brief and respectful of everyone's time. In the United States, to date, the primary value of VPPs is to provide bulk system level peak demand management. There was a recent report by some researchers in the US that estimate the VPP programs in the United States are equivalent to about 38 gigawatts in 2025. The vast majority of that is coming through commercial and industrial demand response. But there are obviously growing resources with respect to smart thermostats and battery energy storage. And we're beginning to see in the US more and more utilities and more states that are looking to virtual power plants to provide, to help overcome some of the constraints within the distribution system and to help defer some expensive distribution system upgrades. In the US in particular, a lot of conversation these days is focused on rate pressure at the retail level. There have been a number of reports indicating that retail rates across the states in the US are rising, and a major contributing factor to those rising rates are distribution system investments. And so, Alejandro, I'd say, up to now and to date, still the vast majority of the value that we see is at the bulk system level. But utilities in Colorado, Massachusetts, and elsewhere are really beginning to think about dispatch locally to help defer some of those more expensive distribution system upgrades.
Thanks, Laken. Surat, let me continue with you. VPPs require a great deal of data sharing to facilitate customer registration, DR interconnection, operation, and dispatch. From EGAT's point of view, what would be the next step regarding data sharing among EGAT, EPO, MEA, and PEA?
Thank you for the questions. Yes, as we got in the previous presentation, the data sharing between the stakeholders is important in order to achieve the successful VPP implementations. So I think because the implementations of VPPs, we need like a broad varieties of different stakeholders like TSO or distribution utilities and the aggregators. So I think to make it successful, we need the centralized data hub that all the stakeholders can share the information securely, and then each stakeholder who want, for example, the EGAT as a system operator, you might need some kind of data to use it in order to secure the power system, but for the distribution utilities, they might have different kind of data. So I think the centralized data hub is important for us to work in the collaborative way, and we need to have the standardized cybersecurity kind of thing, and we need the trusted, for example, the government to support this kind of the data center. That's my opinion. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. I would like to come back to Grayson for our last question. I can see that you have already thought a lot on the e-mobility implications for Thailand. What do you think are the technology and regulatory developments that are near to capture the VPP's potential of EVs in the case of Thailand?
Thanks, Alejandro. So this webinar has been fantastic because it really has underscored the similarity of development challenges across the globe to enable virtual power plants, whether it's aggregating demand response or vehicle to grid. A lot of very, very similar things need to happen in markets and technology development and market development. Just make a very short list: pricing frameworks, market structure, consumer incentives to participate in programs, and probably most importantly is power development planning. So one of the most difficult things for utilities to do these days with the clean energy transition and the development of these new smart grid technologies and new sources of demand from data centers and EVs is power development planning, and building scenarios that would allow utilities to identify what sort of new infrastructure, what sort of new programs are needed. So just as an example here in Thailand, power development plan calls for renewable energy to top 51% of generation capacity by 2035. So that's probably going to create a Thailand duck curve, if you will, the duck curve being demand falling to minimum loading conditions during the afternoon when the solar PV is the highest. And this is an opportunity for vehicle to grid really to serve its purpose, as we were talking before about demand response or load reduction and load building. Larkin talked about this. Vehicle to grid is really a strong candidate to be able to provide that kind of flexibility to grid operators. But in order to know that, you need to do the power development planning, have the scenarios, identify what possibly is going to happen, and then start building programs to be able to provide the flexibility needed in future years. So that's just one example. There are others, but what struck me is the similarity in technology, market, commercial, regulatory requirements across countries that are trying to introduce VPPs and demand response. So thanks very much.
Excellent. Thanks a lot, Grayson. We have gone over time, so I will stop here with the panel. I thank again all the speakers and all the participants in this panel for participating. And I will pass over to my colleague Becky for closing remarks.
Great. Thank you so much, Alejandro. Would really like to thank all of our speakers and panelists for joining us today, and to everyone who joined us virtually for the conversation. On behalf of the Energy Regulatory Commission of Thailand, the Regulatory Assistance Project, and the Regulatory Energy Transition Accelerator, it's been a pleasure to share this time with you, and really appreciate everyone who's joined us across a wide range of time zones and geographies around the world. We really invite you to visit our website, read the full report. I believe we put the link in the chat, and we will send out a recording and presentation materials after we've wrapped up. So thank you again, and enjoy the rest of your day.